So hey there, I'm Julien,
Uh, my name is Alexis.
and we'll be talking about unprefixing and basically what we've learned while going through and prefixing some types of CSS, DOM events, and property attributes. What we've learned and kind of what are the current questions we still have that are pending. Feel free to interrupt us if you have any questions. We want that to be kind of a dynamic discussion as much as possible.
Yeah, plus we didn't prepare anything so beside those slides. Um, so the first big unprefixing effort that we did was, beside very simple properties, was or stuff that was not exposed yet or behind a build flag or runtime flag, was the CSS transition that we did last year. The implementation was prefixed in 2005, and it was actually used afterwards for proposing a specification to W3C. And so we started the unprefixing effort of this in 2012. We started with transition mostly because it was easier than animations, and we wanted to see what's going on. Plus, Firefox, IE, and Opera, at least the Presto version, was shipping unprefixed. So we were the last guy, and it was before the fork, right? So it's get away. It's shipped in Chrome 27, and the latest Safari that's shipping on iOS 7, plus probably the last version of Maverick. So I don't know, maybe 6.1, the latest Safari. It was a 6 months effort, not necessarily because it's a lot of code, but because we waited bug reports and had a lot of caveats and problems that popped up on the way.
It was also the first time we actually tried to unprefix something. Yep.
When you say unprefix, do you mean also allow without prefix or to remove one?
No, it's allow both because there are many websites that still haven't implemented transition with no dash WebKit in front, so we can't just remove the prefix, or at least, and based on the latest of last week usage use counter that was published, then we still see a lot of transition prefixed only, means that we still have a bunch of websites that are only working with WebKit dash WebKit properties.
And the current way forward that we see for prefix property is either the usage is low enough that we can drop them, or we need kind of a way forward to web developer to kind of embrace the unprefixed version first. And then we can drop the prefix version once we have enough buy-in from vendors.
So we're going a bit more specific of how actually it's behaving today and why we'll see dropping the usage of the prefix property. And then at some point, maybe we can remove it and remove the code that's related to it. Problem with unprefixing is that, at least for the transition, and now that we're working on some other unprefixing like the animation, then we have no W3C conformance test. So when we unprefix, then we actually need manually to look at the specification, the way we pass and render all the CSS properties, and see if it actually matched the spec by reading it. And also a lot of very laborious and very slow work to compare with Firefox, compare with IE 10, IE 11, and then Opera before their new version with Blink, and then with Presto, because still a lot of websites are maybe relying on their behavior, and also as like it's really tough to know if we're going to break something, as like, are they relying on some specific WebKit behavior? And then when we switch to the spec behavior, then it will just break.
There's also if we take the example of transitions, Apple kind of went ahead, implemented transitions, and then somebody else kind of wrote the spec. Or there was kind of a huge delta between the two.
Yeah, I spent a fair amount of time, aligning our parsing, aligning our rendering with the spec, with comparing with the other browsers, and so on, because simply nobody touched and cared about transitions in WebKit beside Blink, beside optimizing the performance of it, but actually how it behaves and is because it's so following the spec, nobody actually cared about it. We found few challenges on the way, is such as the one I've wrote like now. Is like, what if I have a div and then it's like I query the transition property on it? It's like what it should return, what WebKit transition should return, what's the count? I mean, this is not necessarily valid as JavaScript, but for example, if I have a div with a transition with it, or a class in CSS with a transition with it, it's like, and what happens if I both define the prefix and the unprefixed? What happens if I only define the prefix? What happens if I only define the unprefixed? And what's the property count of this object? Like, should I count both? Should I not count both? And you may think, well, maybe it's not important, but like a lot of websites are actually counting properties. And I got to bug reports a lot about that. And so it's very challenging for us because the way WebKit worked on the back was that like, each property we pass is one entry on this declared style or on the computed style, and then we didn't have this mechanism. We actually had an aliasing mechanism, but like then the count will not work if we alias both. Then they will be added as a one property on the style, and then the count doesn't work, for example. And also, what happened is that if you get broken code where the unprefixed is different from the prefix, like the value is different. It's like what I should return. And is it a broken case? Do we want to handle it? Which one will which one take precedence? Will we break the website or not? And all of this is like completely not covered by anybody on the W3C or anybody. We're just testing. We're just looking the other what they did.
What you also have to see is for like at least transition and WebKit transitions, we basically store that as the same data internally. It's the same slot in render style. So if you set transition and query WebKit transition, you probably will get something.
So the way it's implemented today is that if you set a transition unprefixed on CSS and a prefix transition, then the unprefixed will take precedence always. And actually, if they are different, then the unprefixed value will always win. And they're on the so for the people that knows how it works with CSS inside, the declared style or the CSS style property set, C++ class in Blink will always contain both properties. So the count is always correct, depending on if you declare both in your style or one or the other. But actually at the resolve time on the style resolver, then we only resolve one of them. So if you set it both, then we're always going to resolve the unprefixed one. If you set it the prefixed one, then we always resolve the prefixed one. And if you set the unprefixed, then we'll set the unprefixed one. So they're just kept as resolving time. One of them will be skipped if you set it both. And the unprefixed will always win. Then, for example, now I'm in the middle of that problem. Then this is the code you find on internet. So I'm unprefixing the animation right now, and so you have this kind of code. So as you can see on the @-WebKit keyframe, then it set a transform, right? A WebKit transform, and then on the @keyframe, then we set a transform, right? Unprefixed. And problem is that the day I'm shipping the unprefixed animation, CSS animation, then @-WebKit keyframe will not be resolved, right? As I was explaining before, the unprefixed version always takes precedence. So we'll start resolving the top one, not the bottom one like today. And what happened is that CSS transform in WebKit are not unprefixed. So then all that thing broke, like the transform is not going to apply. So then we are going to break a lot of websites. And which means that we cannot ship, despite we're almost there for unprefixing the animation, we cannot ship them by default before we remove the transform and unprefix the transform, which I found very unfortunate because it's two different features, right? That should not be tied to each other, but they are. So this is the kind of problem we find with such examples. Or, for example, JavaScript functions that only handle prefix and prefix, and then they are not called correctly, but that is broken code on websites, so I just close the bugs for that. But this is exactly what problems we find. So we give the transform as an example because it's a very big problem for us because transform is very common, but like it could be any proprietary property or any dash WebKit property that you put on your at dash WebKit keyframe that is going to break anyway. But at least to not break 30% of the web at once, we will need to unprefix the transform first and then ship.
Is it okay if we discuss, or
Yeah.
first present?
No,
No,
go ahead.
Okay, so what do I want to say? I want to say one intermediate possibility. I wonder if you must have considered this, and please tell me what you think. Could we not recognize the situation where the user has given us an unprefixed set of keyframes or some other, if there's any other CSS quirks which have this kind of pattern, and in that unprefixed scenario, just for maybe a temporary, until we are able to unprefix all the other properties, can we not have some extra logic that recognizes
repeat the question?
prefix and unprefix?
So the question is like if we could at parsing time and at resolving time saying, okay, well, we are going to resolve this keyframe on the top, and then, oh, there is a transform property that is not yet supported. But if we look ahead and then look at dash WebKit, then we'll see that there is this dash WebKit transform that we could use. Yeah, we could do that. But like, to be honest, I think it will add a lot of complexity on the code. And
Actually, could I clarify? It sounded like what you were saying is not exactly the same as what I'm proposing. What I was proposing is, if we recognize we have an unprefixed
we start passing the other one.
we can just accept the unprefixed.
That's actually a good idea.
But more generally, we still would not.
Yeah, I think this could be possible. This could be possible.
And I just want to, just to complete the thought.
Yeah, but then
Maybe even we could add some sort of console error message just for the developer to see.
yeah, the only problem is that then you get out of sync, and then people will say, oh, I'm changing my add keyframe, and then it doesn't get resolved. Why, right? And so they'll think that now that we ship unprefixed, then they should do everything in their add keyframe, and then they will do everything their add keyframe, and then but what happened is that because there is this transform laying around, then we're going to resolve the add dash WebKit keyframe, and then they will not know exactly what's going on. I mean, it's a tricky problem. I think the ideal solution without code complexity would be to work to unprefix the transform, because anyway we want to achieve that goal. So let's do it. And
You also have to understand that from a web developer perspective, there's like kind of two modes. Either we're prefixed or we're unprefixed, which is why we end up with this code, which is either everything is prefixed or nothing. And if I understood correctly your proposal, it means we're kind of in this halfway mode where we kind of apply both at the same time. And I'm sure that's going to break authors' expectations, which we really don't want to do.
so for the record, IE and Firefox and Opera, they unprefixed everything altogether, transformed animation and transitions. We didn't go that path because we knew our implementations needed few fixes before going wild and ship unprefixes. So that's why we did it gradually.
So I have one more follow-up thing then. How willing are we to accept a few idiosyncrasies and incompatibilities, and then how willing are we to at least get those fixed after we unprefix? Is that a big no, or would we be willing to do that? Because some of these problems with the transform properties, maybe they're just bugs. There's some ambiguities in the spec, and ultimately, as these get clarified, maybe the implementation has to change. But if we don't, are we willing to go ahead and unprefix even though we have that change that may come up? Or do we want to make sure that that change happens?
No, I mean, it's like if you look the spec, well, I can see, but like what we try to do is that what I myself try to do is like when I'm unprefixing this, I'm reading from line 0 to the last line, the entire spec, so that I try to clarify as much as I can all the behavior up front before I ship, right? so that by the time I ship, then to me it looks okay, right? And then of course, like any spec, then it keeps evolving, right? I mean, spec get fixed even after we ship, right? So that we sometimes change behavior, and for the good of it, right? Not necessarily related to prefixed or non-prefixed features. Like for any feature in CSS, we do that.
Okay, so the final thing I have to say then, just for now, is I was actually ready to sit here and claim, oh, wait a minute, I feel uncomfortable unprefixing this because we have some of these behaviors that need to be resolved on spec. We need to debug a few things so that when it's unprefixed, it's available in a fairly good state that will be unchanging for developers. I was going to say that.
Yeah, but
If we actually feel that we're willing to have some of these little changes, the developers may have to absorb some problems, then I actually would be okay with unprefixing ASAP. Really, there's nothing blocking that.
yeah, and I'm not sure I see your name, but maybe you're the guy posting about the transform, right? On the mailing list when I was asking the question, right?
Actually, yeah, that was.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, it's the case by case of all the lists you posted. Like, I think we should go case by case and then compare what the other vendors do. And then if the other vendors behave the same as we do, so if we have to change the spec because it's broken, then everyone will have to fix it anyway. Then the entire web will have to move forward and change their code, right? So I think, yeah, it should be fine, provided that others are actually behaving the same, right?
That may not be true.
Exactly. That's why I said we should go case by case and see what's blocking us, right? Is it implemented in Firefox, right? Is it working in Firefox? Is it working in IE? It's like, okay, well then if it's not working for us, we need to make it happen before.
Okay, so what would we say in the cases where the other browsers might be the ones who are buggy in those particular scenarios? Because I think that's our situation.
Okay.
Should we discuss this later? Or?
Yeah, I think it's better to take that offline. Okay. You guys could sync up. There was also another question.
Well, you actually answered it.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Then we found a new world of problems like the DOM events. So the transitions and the animations, they fire DOM events. So for example, when the animation is completed or when you change the iteration and so on. And then it's like, so we have prefixed and unprefixed DOM events. It's like when we should deliver the prefixed and the unprefixed DOM events. And then we didn't have any infrastructure in WebKit to actually handle any of that. So it's like, so I have JavaScript listener, and then it's like I have on both, right? And then it was like, which one I should call? And so we decided behavior because that was the most sensible one, and it's actually the one that Opera chose, and I believe Firefox and IE. But so we decided that if you have an event listener only on the unprefixed version, then we'll fire the event listener on the unprefixed version. Then if you have on the prefixed version, then we fire on the prefixed only. And then if you have on both, then we always take precedence on the unprefixed listener. And that's how other browser did. But like we needed to implement that infrastructure on the DOM dispatching event because we didn't have any of that. And also we needed to implement the possibility to create events. You can create these DOM events. So it's like create again additional code and burden for creating these. And I was always explaining the correct dispatching, defining a behavior, and I found all this problem on my way. It's like I broke one of the famous website, but luckily it was before shipping all of that, right? It was on Canary, so it's like Canary is very good for that. So you can break everything, and then they tell you it's broken. And then also it's like, should we have a framework? Because today is very manual. It's like it's checking what's the event name, and then on the fly change the event name, and then when the event is dispatched, then you will change again the event and so on. And should we have a framework for that? Is it worth it to have a framework for that? Because at the end, we want to get rid of that code at some point in the future. So it's like, and it's a good discussion. I mean, I'm bringing discussion here, and after you can talk to me and we can talk about the subject. But so yeah, DOM events that needs to be handled.
So I'll talk a little bit. Well, I'll talk about presentation attributes because they are next on the list. Who is familiar with what a presentation attributes is? Awesome. Okay. So presentation attributes are just DOM attributes that gets translated into a CSS property. The example I have, which is the marquee speed attribute, gets actually translated into what they call the inline style, into an internal properties. That the idea is we reuse the CSS logic to pass in some value to the rendering. That's really what it is at the end of the day. One of the problems we had is because those were prefixed with -WebKit, they were exposed. So people could now, instead of just putting them, instead of letting the user agent put them in this inline style that the author never ever sees, they could actually put them in the style sheet, and that would work because it's the same logic. We have the logic to parse it, to apply it, and then to use it in rendering. So that kind of, we had an issue with that because most of them were non-standards. Most of them were pretty much, we have an issue with that because we count them. So we don't know if they were really unused. What happens is this gets translated into a style. So our use counter actually counts them as if they were actually in the author style sheet. This example is actually something we actually did. It used to be WebKit marquee speed, and then we basically exposed it last week. The backstory is this was actually exposing a lot of our code for no good reason. So we're trying to see with marquee as kind of one of the first example we can do to check if that's actually okay to unexpose stuff as we go along. And like this also helps us test if the internal properties actually work. Is everybody familiar with what an internal properties actually is? Yeah, okay, I'll explain a little bit. Everything that starts with -internal basically is now limited to the UA style sheet. That means you will never ever expose it or accept it if it's in any other type of style sheet.
So, for example, the media control CSS files, do those count as UA style sheets, or do those need to be? I've been considering just changing all of those special properties.
This is a UA style sheet.
It is.
Definitely, yeah.
It shouldn't be exposed, and we should probably rename them. I don't think it did it.
Yeah. This is the very beginning. I mean, internal is like
2 weeks,
a month old.
Yeah, 3 weeks old.
Like, yeah, it's a month old, let's say. We're still looking, we still think we are not leaking any information because basically at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to hide as much information as we can from web developers so that they don't start to rely on that because that's internal stuff. That's for us, not for them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, this is basically a problem solved. If you have a presentation attributes, switch into internals.
Like the media control.
The media control, good example.
I think there will be also a few stuff of the shadow dome that probably needs to get renamed.
Runtime flags. Our approach actually to like unprefixing usually involves a runtime flag and a use counter. First, you basically put the use counter so that you know what the usage is. Based on the usage, maybe you can just unprefix and not care about. I mean, if we're not breaking a lot of website, might just not be the hassle of actually going through a runtime flag, more use counter, wait, remove the flag, remove the scaffolding code.
Yeah, so something I need to add is that we actually track the usage of prefixed, unprefixed, and then when you have both in the declaration. So we want to track all the 3 cases to make a choice of it's like at some point when the prefixed support is only so low, then we can just drop it, right?
Yeah, what you have to understand is everything we're talking about here is really should be temporary code. In the future, we want to never ever have anything exposed that we don't want to expose. And hopefully we can live in a better world where we have enough testing, enough coverage, and basically enough awareness of what we expose so that it doesn't happen again that we expose something that we don't want. What's interesting is we had this problem where what happens if you disable your feature and now you do a get computed style? What should it return? And if you now start to set it, where does it return? Basically, this should behave, if it's disabled, as if this was an unrecognized property. So first one is null, second one is just you return foo. You accept foo as like you're overriding some JavaScript slot. We don't care about it. This wasn't the case. And the problem was we had no testing. And that's where Dirk can recognize the virtual stable test suite. So what happens is we added a new flag that basically toggles content shell to run in a more stable-like configuration. It's not totally stable, but it's close enough that that gives us a good idea of what we expose in stable.
Yeah, maybe you should add that when we run the test on the bots and when you run your test on your machine, then this famous flag enable experimental web feature is on, right? So we can test the features we are developing on, right? But the stable branch of Chrome doesn't ship with this by default, which means that when we run the bots, then if you leak your feature without warning it, and then we had no way to catch it. So that's why we added this virtual stable test suite, which then we run the test without the flag on, so then we can check the exposed JavaScript properties and make sure we don't leak any of them. And we clearly fired ourselves in the foot because we actually exposed some. So
yeah, the code, we basically discovered as we went along that you had to be extremely careful about how you crafted the code to actually know about that. And we decided that basically now we should have like one way to actually check it and make sure that new people coming with new properties shouldn't expose them by mistake. So hopefully this makes sure that we don't regress. If you want to test something on stable, like make sure something isn't exposed or isn't accepted, that's definitely the way to go right now. Oh, so the future. So the future of unprefixing, there is any future, is like we really want to count everything as much as we can so that we can make better educated decisions. Some people mention like we have a couple of CSS keywords that are actually prefixed, believe it or not. We don't count them right now. Ideally, we would like to have something to make sure that if they're not used, you can just unprefix them and we're good to go. Kind of an open question is like, where do we put the threshold to removal? Or at least to direct unprefixing versus going through the runtime flag road.
Is exactly in the case of the transition is like now it's shipping for almost a year, then it's like let's say we have a percentage of prefixed only websites, so it means that they only use dash WebKit dash WebKit transition is like when we consider it's good for removal, meaning we can get rid of the property in the code, get rid of several code paths and so on. It's like we have no policy for that in Blink, and I think we should study one because we should give it like, okay, what's the threshold for removing that feature? Also, on the better monitoring part is that we are not also counting, for example, keyframes, and we should also fix the use counter to actually start having stats on the keyframe for or at least me and other people in the community to say, okay, well now we have only this amount of people using dash WebKit keyframes, so we can just get rid of it.
Yes, Adam.
Yeah, I think rather than having a threshold, I think we should just try one and like see how badly we fall on our face. Maybe we'll turn it back on and try again.
So Adam was basically advocating for the pitchfork approach until the web developer comes back to us with like pitchfork and fires. We're good to go.
Yeah, well, we should pick one that like people will understand why we're doing it, right?
If you've been at
why would that be a good strategy?
Yeah, if
advocate. Oh, I think that like trying to pick a threshold, like I mean that's not how we talk about removing other features. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Than dropping XSLT support. So it's really hard to put a number on this.
Exactly.
0.02 users?
It's from my last look on the transition, prefix transition, it's really high. I don't remember exactly, but much more than 0.0 or something.
On what you're removing to certain things
transition is most likely happening in animations. It's like you break logos, menu, drop-down menu, and stuff like that. So like, it's
yeah. Also, this kind of reminds me of how it used to work. Like unprefixing used to work in WebKit Word, and basically people had very few success stories because basically the pitchfork approach usually means you're completely blind.
No,
Yeah.
sorry. Let me rephrase.
Okay.
I'm super interested in the metrics, but to figure out where our threshold for pain is, I think we need to try it.
Yep. There's also like inside Better Monitoring, I know Mozilla, what they do is like they basically crawl over I don't know how many pages and they look at the actual usage. Maybe that's something we would like to use in our tool set so that we can say, okay, we have this amount of usage and we know that in Alexia 1000 or the top million websites, here is the use, here is what we break. That would be probably something that we could combine and give us a more fine-grained understanding of like what's the impact of our change.
Another option is to run both on and off and compare results.
That's a good one too, yeah.
That's also a good one.
Animations are usually require interaction. Yeah, animations are harder than dominate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It sounds a little bit like the approach is to look at the stats and then wait until they're low enough. But are you? I guess this is the question for DevRel if you have that department as well. Do you intend to give web developers an incentive to drop their prefixes? And would that be just something like errors in the console, or do you have any ideas for that?
Yeah, that's actually true. Today we don't have any mechanism. I mean, we don't throw any warning in the console when you use a prefixed only transition. But yeah, it's a good suggestion. It's easy for me to implement such a warning, so we could do it.
So there is Eric Biddleman from the DevRel, but I don't think he's around right now. Definitely we can talk with him about it. I'm sure, well, we definitely want to do something about that.
I don't think the other UA are actually throwing a warning in the console, but if we want, as we are the last, for example, on the transition, we are the last one. So maybe we want to be the last one to say, hey guys, it's time to get the fuck out of the transition.
There was actually some talk about like taking data from the the new dashboard metrics, and like if the feature is below a certain amount of time and has been around for long enough, let's just like throw a warning in the console that this is basically stage 4 removal. Or
it would seem like some combination of the statistics and then the information we have on the Chrome status dashboard over who's implemented this, who's already unprefixed it. You could turn that around and build a tool that was, like a lint or something where you're like, hey, you can go check out your site on this and we'll tell you just like, page speed and those other things.
Yeah.
You're using these prefixes. They're all unprefixed now. You can update your code, and these are
exactly from the stat website, the use counter. We don't really have the URL of the websites that are actually triggering, for example, the prefixed only support. And not sure if the actual tool do it, but then it's not exposed for various privacy reason or legal reason.
Right. No, I mean you wouldn't do it that way, but like you could use that to inform what we thought was safe or not safe. Right.
Yeah.
And then you could build another tool where if somebody types in their URL, we look it up in the index, or we look it up, or you just go out and spider the site then and look for errors, right? Just like you would with link checking and tidy checking and that sort of thing.
yeah, why not?
I guess officially over, but
Okay.
it's 15 minutes past the pretty. So
Okay.
good questions.
But there was a question right here.
I was going to ask, how do you actually measure the usage of these properties?
So we have a use counter on CSS properties that basically measure whether we saw the properties when passing the different style sheets.
How is that reported from like real users to
Yeah.
Yes.
Stable. People
no.
run it.
No.
Like
Okay.
opt-ins.
Yeah. Okay. So this is an opt-in mechanism. Users that wants to do it, do it. And this runs over all the channels. And then we aggregate the information and we now expose it into the, how do we call it, the dashboard, the new dashboard.
It's anonymous.
Yeah.
So the percentage is like percentage of users versus percentage of websites?
Percentage of pages, viewed pages. So we would tell you like if it's 90%, means that 90% of the time the page had this property.
So that's, and to be clear in that, because I missed that the first time, this is actually page loads, not total pages, right? Every
Yes.
time you're hitting refresh on a page or revisiting the page, the counter is going up.
Yeah.
It's not like percentage of all sites on the web or anything like that. Because we don't record the URL or anything, we have no way of deduping that.
Yeah.
Right.
On something on the beta monitoring, when I was closing the full screen mode, also we don't count pseudo classes. Pseudo classes, like for instance, like before, after, we don't know their usage, and we should also fix that because it's good for us to know what properties is used or not, so we can remove it or not.
Okay. We're running out of time. Last questions, and then we'll wrap up.
You talked about how for these prefix properties, different UAs have different implementations. When you look at websites that use both the prefixed and unprefixed versions, do you find that they're accounting for, or maybe taking advantage of those differences, or is it simply copy-pasting with and without prefix?
My own experience base is that it's copy pasted. We're just adding dash webkit, dash mos, or dash o, or dash ms. Yeah, no, I mean, from my experience, the behavior differences were either in rendering, like how is the animation played, or in parsing corner cases, like what if I said 0, you know, or stuff like that, and then it was not necessarily clear on the spec what to do, or it was just us having a historical behavior on doing so. That I actually seen one website that was relying on our own behavior of 0 on the transition, and it was Yahoo News, Top News or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the problem is that we had 3 years of DevRel telling people cut and paste, you know, and future-proof yourself by putting all of the prefixes for all the browsers in and the unprefixed one in. That's how you should deal with new features, right? And so it's got to be like, you know, at least 80-20 or 90-10 or worse. That versus somebody was like, oh shit, I need to actually tweak the O-trans version of this.
But for example, on the transition, a specific example, I think we could get our usage of the prefixed only version done if W3C or our evangelist actually now say, okay, well now everybody, including Safari, Apple, right, are shipping unprefixed transition, so you should get rid of it. And this message haven't happened yet.
Right.
First, because iOS 7 was released like a few weeks ago, or 1 week ago. So, and this, yeah, so we should probably pass the message now, at least for the transition.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.